Okay, I'm on page 518. Actually, 519. During 1940, its first full year of operation, the Bronx Whitestone Bridge, 6,317,489 vehicles passed through the Bronx Whitestone's toll booths, cramming its 4 lanes to capacity and causing massive tie-ups on it. Traffic on the Triborough was reduced by 122,519 vehicles. Traffic on the other 4 East River bridges was not reduced at all. In fact, it rose slightly. Somehow the new bridge had generated, in a single year, more than 6 million new on and off island motor trips. It had not improved the traffic situation on the old bridges at all. What had been the net effect of its $17,785,000 construction, or in fact, of the construction of both it and the Triborough Bridge, on the traffic problem these bridges were built to solve? Before they existed, 4 bridges had connected Long Island with the rest of the world, and they had all been jammed. Now, 6 bridges connected Long Island with the rest of the world, and they were all jammed. By dumping a tremendous new load on the Long Island parkways, the Bronx Whitestone Bridge made the traffic tie-ups on them noticeably worse. Shortly after the bridge opened, Moses completed the road linking the bridge with Westchester County, the Hutchinson River Parkway. Soon, that was jammed too. The Gowanus Parkway, the elevated highway Moses placed atop the pillars of the old BMT elevated line on Brooklyn's 3rd Avenue. Okay, wait, I didn't know that. I feel like maybe I should have known that. But wow, okay, the Gowanus Parkway is built on top of the old BMT elevated line. All right. It was opened November 1, 1941, just in time for another mayoral election. When Commissioner Moses finds the surface of the earth too congested for one of his parkways, he lifts the road in the air and continues it on its way. The Times editorialized. A busy, crowded region lay in Mr. Moses's path, too heavily built up for a leisurely, landscaped parkway. The problem was solved successfully. Beginning today, Brooklyn reaps a new, incalculable highway benefit. Brooklyn's borough president called Moses an artist who, in his own field, ranked with Leonardo da Vinci. The canvas on which Moses had drawn the Gowanus creation was a neighborhood known as Sunset Park. Its residents had pleaded with Moses to build the parkway not along 3rd Avenue, but along 2nd, 1 block to the west near the waterfront. 2nd Avenue ran not through a neighborhood, but through the middle of Bush Terminal, a 200-acre agglomeration, I don't know why it took a 200-acre agglomeration of piers, railroad sidings, lofts, and factories that was already so noisy with the clatter of trucks and freight cars that the noise generated by a few more lanes of traffic would hardly be noticed. Comptroller McGoldrick, a resident of Sunset Park, had agreed with them. He pointed out that the city had been planning to tear down the elevated line because a new parallel subway had recently been built under 4th Avenue, and that the elevated at least let some light in. The parkway would be solid, and it would be wider than the L. It would come right up to the windows of the buildings. The comptroller, along with non-Moses engineers, doubted Moses's contention that using the L pillars would be much cheaper than building a whole new parkway, particularly since it would have to swing back to the shore after 1 mile, a distance long enough to permanently blight a neighborhood, but not to make a substantial difference in cost. Moses had replied by telling the Board of Estimate that Sunset Park wasn't particularly worth saving because it was a slum. A slum! That wasn't a slum, said Kathy Catarin, who lived in Sunset Park. That was a very nice neighborhood. It was poor but clean. Actually, part of the area was dirty poor. Blight spawned in the dirt and noise of the Bush Terminal piers, warehouses, factories, and railroad sidings along the waterfront. Had oozed inland along the side streets, forcing clean, poor families to flee before it, and leaving the old brownstone and red brick front houses to derelicts, winos, and whores. But that was just part of the area. And it wasn't what families like the Catarins thought of as the neighborhood at all. What they thought of as Sunset Park, the area extending from west of 3rd Avenue all the way to 8th and from 36th Street to 63rd, and containing some 70,000 people, half of them Norwegians, the rest Finns, Danes, Irish, and Germans, had been menaced by that blight for at least 30 years. But they had always stood it off. Although it had spread inland as far as 2nd Avenue by the time of World War I, that was where it stopped. In 1940, it had not gotten even a foothold on the side streets between 2nd and 3rd. And despite the Depression, which hit especially hard at a neighborhood of skilled carpenters and house painters and plumbers, 60% of Sunset Park men were members of trade unions. They had made a world of their own. It was indeed, as Kathy Catterin said, a clean world. The brick fronts and brownstones were immaculate. One could walk by them any morning and see the housewives sanding and scrubbing their stoops. Even the sidewalks were swept. The little plots of grass that the owners proudly called lawns may have been tiny, but they were lush green and neatly trimmed. But it was more than clean. It was quiet and peaceful. There were many trees lining the streets, but few cars. Not many people around there had cars then, recalls Hertha Smaglow. When people wanted to go to work or to the city, they took the elevated. And warm and friendly. Every summer brought a round of block parties, street lamps festooned with streamers, women and girls in pleasant blouses from their native lands, folk singers with their accordions singing the old songs, long tables covered with tablecloths washed and washed again until they gleamed snowy under the lamps. And with heaping bowls of, I don't even know what this is, Kalalatico and Hernierooka. In Finntown, the section of Sunset Park east of 5th Avenue and south of 36th Street that contained half a dozen public saunas. I want to go. There were also half a dozen cooperative apartment houses, and many of the same families had been living in them for a quarter of a century. In the evening, families walked together to the bluff of Sunset Park to look out at the ship-filled New York harbor. Girls like Kathy Catterin, who grew up there, married boys from the neighborhood and raised their own families there because we wouldn't want to live anywhere else. The heart of the neighborhood, the focal point that gave it unity and a sense of community, was 3rd Avenue. Lining it, along with newsstands off which 9,000 Nordisk Tiendens were sold every day, I'm guessing that's a newspaper, were 7 movie theaters, dozens of tiny restaurants run by couples and featuring recipes from the old countries. Little restaurants, but good, and so many you wouldn't know where to go for lunch, recalls Harold Benson, whose hardware store was on 3rd Avenue at 54th Street. And scores of small, friendly mom-and-pop stores. The Northland gift shop, the Finnish bookstore, a hardware store that looks like a general store out of the Old West, a butcher shop that raffled off 25 big turkeys every Christmas. That occupied the ground floor of 3- and 4-story brick fronts in which Mama and Papa lived upstairs with the children. The avenue was always busy, people shopping or window shopping or just walking, Benson recalls. The L overhead was noisy, but, the shopkeepers say, you got used to the trains, and anyway, when they built the new subway under 4th Avenue, we thought it was going to be torn down. The soot and cinders that wafted down from the L were annoying, but the shopkeepers kept the sidewalks clean by sweeping them morning, noon, and night. Clean, Kathy Catterin recalls, those were the cleanest stores you ever saw. And the L made 3rd Avenue even more of a focal point for a neighborhood in which not many people had cars. Hi, Andrew. We're talking about in Sunset Park in, I'm guessing, the 30s. It was mostly Finnish. Maybe you knew that. I didn't. Okay, so we're talking about the history of Sunset Park, and they had an elevated rail line, but then he's about to build the big highway, the elevated highway, the Gowanus, what's it called? The Gowanus Parkway. And so I'm imagining that maybe this wonderful community is not gonna last, but we'll see. And the L made 3rd Avenue even more of a focal point for a neighborhood in which not many people had cars. The husbands all took it to work, says Kathy Wild. So there were always people coming to 3rd Avenue to take it. This made the avenue even busier. Neighborhood girls didn't hesitate to walk down to the movies at night in pairs or to go shopping in the evening alone. You would think the L would have been a divider of the neighborhood, but it wasn't really, said Miss Wild. In a way, because everyone was using it, it brought it closer together. Third Avenue was never an aesthetic avenue, but it was a nice avenue. If Third Avenue was the heart of the neighborhood, Moses tore it out. Relocation began the procedure. The Board of Estimate had approved the Third Avenue route under the impression that because Moses was using an already existing facility, the old L structure, no new right-of-way would be required, and hence no families would have to be evicted from their homes. But after the approval was given, the board found that the impression was not quite accurate. It was off, in fact, by some 100 stores and 1,300 families. Some buildings had to be torn down because, while an L did not need entrance and exit ramps, a highway did. And a single entrance ramp took half a block of homes. But this need accounted for only a minor percentage of the relocations. Most of the buildings that were torn down, and every building on one side of 3rd Avenue between 39th and 63rd Streets was torn down, had to go because Moses would not allow trucks on his parkways. And so that he would build it instead of the city, he classified this elevated highway through a densely packed urban area, a highway unadorned by a single tree, as a parkway. Since Moses's Brooklyn Battery Tunnel would pour trucks as well as cars into Brooklyn just north of Sunset Park, and since trucks as well as cars would need a route south, he decided to make 3rd Avenue that route by making that 4-lane street under the parkway into a 10-lane highway. Okay, wow, I didn't realize that that he didn't allow trucks on his parkways. We definitely have learned that in the book, but I didn't remember that. The L had cast a shadow over 3rd Avenue, but the L had been 40 feet wide. The Gowanus was 94 feet wide. Its shadow was more than twice as broad. I imagine that because it's Robert Caro, he went and measured it someday. And more than twice as dark. The gaps between railroad ties had made the L shadow a Venetian blind shadow. Sunlight had come through as if through the slats of an opened blind. A highway was a concrete slab without gaps. The construction of the Gowanus Parkway, laying a concrete slab on top of a lively, bustling 3rd Avenue, buried the avenue in shadow. And when the parkway was completed, the avenue was cast forever into darkness and gloom. Its bustle and life were forever gone. And through that shadow, down on the 10-lane surface road beneath the parkway, rumbled, from before dawn until after dark, after the opening of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel flooded the area with freight traffic, regiments, brigades, divisions of huge tractor-trailer trucks, engines gunning and backfiring, horns blasting, brakes screeching so that a tape recording of 3rd Avenue at midday could have been used as the soundtrack for a movie of a George Patton tank column. And from above, from the parkway itself, came the continual surging, dull, surf-like roar, punctuated, of course, by more backfires and blasts and screeches of the cars passing overhead. Once 3rd Avenue had been friendly. Now it was frightening. It was made more frightening by the absence of people. Stores, restaurants, and theaters had brought people to 3rd Avenue. Now half the stores, restaurants, and theaters were gone. The L had brought people through 3rd Avenue on their way to and from its stations. The parkway did not. Moreover, although the L had been a huge, gloomy structure, it was, as Kathy Wild put it, one that people from the neighborhood related to. They traveled on it. They were familiar with it. The parkway was something unfamiliar and strange. There were no lights underneath it, and it always seemed damp there. Condensation on the tubular steel supporting pillars caused a constant dripping on the street. The highway was something different, Miss Wild says. It was noise, dirt, accidents, not lighted, a garbage dump, drag races along it in the night, wild kids, something totally negative. Okay, drag race hater. It was a tremendous psychological barrier. In a way, you could say the people feared the highway. It was something to stay away from. It was a physical barrier, too. Elderly persons and mothers with small children found 3rd Avenue frightening not only because it was negative, but because it was wide. Crossing the 10-lane truck road, wider than a football field, was even more of a problem because the traffic lights never seems to allow enough time for anyone not in the best of health to get across. Sunset Park families began to do their shopping in stores that were not on 3rd Avenue. Once the avenue had been a place for people, Robert Moses had made it a place for cars. And as the avenue's roadway became more crowded, its sidewalks began to empty. The vicious gyre of urban decay began and widened. Because there weren't as many people shopping on 3rd Avenue, there weren't enough stores. There weren't enough to support the avenue's stores and restaurants, not even the half of the stores and restaurants that remained after the widening. One by one, they began to close. Because there weren't as many stores and restaurants, people began doing their shopping and dining out elsewhere. And then there were even fewer people on 3rd Avenue. Because the streets in the evening were no longer filled with people, more people who might have gone to 3rd Avenue in the evening stayed away. Fewer people meant even less business. One by one, the shops and restaurants closed. The shop that had raffled off 25 turkeys raffled off 10 now, and then 1. And then it was gone. That's the best detail in the whole chapter so far. And since the owners of many of the stores had lived in the apartments over them, when they were forced to move their businesses out of the neighborhood, they were forced to move their families out too. And those families had provided customers for other stores. Not only 3rd Avenue was wrecked by the road, so were the side streets between it and the waterfront. With Moses's road and tunnel making Sunset Park more accessible to trucks, industries requiring truck traffic, including 2 large new plants, one a division of Bethlehem Steel, the other a division of American Machine and Foundry, moved onto Sunset Park's waterfront, already crowded with industrial activity. And the truck traffic for all these factories had no way to get to and from them from 3rd Avenue except through these narrow streets, between whose parked cars the children of the neighborhood had always played. There was just so much traffic on those little streets, you couldn't believe it, Kathy Caterin recalls. The death of one little boy hit by a huge tractor trailer in the street right in front of his house was enough. Faster and faster, the residents of the side streets began to move out. The whole area died with the road, a resident would marvel, and it died so quick. Soon it was, in his words, a ghost town. Along the avenues and on adjacent side streets, rows of brownstone and brick front buildings that had held stores and apartments, the stores and apartments that had stood as a bulwark between Sunset Park and the slum to the west, began to be vacated. Their rooms, the rooms that had been kept so clean and neat, stood empty. And into them came what the neighborhood had always feared. Sex. 3rd Avenue became the place you could get sex, Kathy Caterin recalls. Everybody knew about it. Drunks as well as whores roamed the avenue, cadging drinks until they fell asleep in doorways. Cheap saloons opened in some of the abandoned stores. Soon there were street gangs, fighting gangs, Irish and Puerto Rican teenagers, sweeping down from the notorious Red Hook section to continue their racial warfare and prey on passersby. The side streets off 3rd Avenue, streets whose apartments were now filled with families on welfare, families without fathers, and with poor Spanish-speaking families without clothes adequate for the cold New York winters, became places to dump and strip stolen cars. The streets began to be filled with their ravaged hulks. Rotting litter, rain-sodden mattresses, and broken glass filled the sidewalks and gutters. Rats began to grow bold in the rubbish in vacant lots. There were even, to the horror of those residents who remained, drug addicts. With its heart gone, the neighborhood had no will to resist the invasion. There was nothing to hold its people, and as they saw the blight creeping closer, they simply moved away. For more than 30 years, the blight in South Brooklyn had been confined to the waterfront area. Now, thanks to Robert Moses and his parkway, it was on the loose, spreading across Sunset Park. The world of neat little houses and block parties vanished beneath it, along the entire 26-block length of the Gowanus Parkway, as far east as 4th Avenue, and, except for a few isolated blocks, as far west as 6th, where the parkway was far enough away so that the community put up a stand and won. Moses' steel and concrete lifted into the air above a neighborhood for the convenience of motorists driving through the neighborhood to get somewhere else, had destroyed the neighborhood. Convenience, I'm going to read one more paragraph. No sooner would Moses open the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel at one end of the Gowanus Parkway and the Belt Parkway at the other end of the Gowanus, and the other end, that the Gowanus would be so jammed solid with traffic. At rush hours, the traffic trying to get up onto it would be backed up solid, spilling off ramps and back into the neighborhood for blocks. Because there were no shoulders on the elevated road on which a disabled car could pull off, one disabled car could tie up a whole lane for hours. Moses knew what to do about that, he said. Widen the Gowanus Parkway, creating 6 lanes instead of 4, although there would still be no shoulders. That would bring the road right up to the windows of the apartments that were left along it. The cars would be so close to the buildings that on wet days, the spray they kicked up would splatter the apartment windows. No matter, Moses said, the Gowanus would have to be widened, and he widened it. Residents of Sunset Park had pleaded with Moses to build the road along 2nd Avenue instead of 3rd. After it was built and they saw what it had done to their neighborhood, they knew their suggestion had been correct. That was an industrial area anyway. Building it over there wouldn't have changed anything in the area at all, Kathy Catterin said. But no newspaper mentioned that fact. The end for the day. RIP to Finntown. It sounds like a fun place to go. I can't believe that there used to be a little part of Brooklyn with 12 spas, 12 saunas. I mean, I would have totally gone there. Goodbye.